Okay.
Sweet. All right. Hello, everyone. I was just taking a look at the issue list left. You guys are just barreling through them. Already week 5. And then we're already past the halfway point. Woo!
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? Super, super crazy. All right. Well, as we do every week, if anyone doesn't have any questions or burning questions or anything from this last week, maybe does a pair want to volunteer to go first for demos?
I guess we can go first, Arniqua, if you're ready.
Yes, I am.
All right. Thank you so much.
So I'll be sharing my screen. And Arniqua, you're going to start us off, right?
Yes.
And do you want, tell me where you want me to be?
Acceptance criteria.
Okay. Oops.
Alrighty. So for this week, we were tasked with showing different error messages. So for example, if a user tries to submit an empty item, or if they try to submit a new item that's identical to an existing name. And we were also, showing an error message if the user tries to submit a new item that matches an existing name with punctuation, casing, normalized, and then ensure that the user's original input is saved into the database.
And should we go to the live demo?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess a couple of examples that we had involve the word apples. So if we put in apples, well, if you put it in exactly as it is, then the user gets that message that it's already on the list. If there's some random spaces, excuse me, they get the same message. We chose to have the actual user input display in the feedback message. We discussed whether we should do that or show the normalized feedback. But since this is what's getting added to the database, we just decided to go with that, even though it looks kind of funny. And then same thing with if we have some uppercase and some spaces and some weird symbols, it should still recognize that as apples. The one thing that we talked about that was a little bit weird about this is it doesn't actually, I mean, this doesn't look anything like the word apples, and nobody's probably going to type apples like that. But what they might actually do is type apples with, I don't know, 1 P instead of 2, or singular apple instead of multiple apples. So the acceptance criteria didn't include anything about addressing that, but it was just a topic that we discussed because, yeah, we ended up like misspelling some things on purpose, like putting in bread, bread spelled correctly, and then bread spelled B-R-E-D. So they both end up on the list. So anyway, maybe that's something we could discuss at some point, but but there's no spell check feature here. It just normalizes for casing, for punctuation, and for spacing. And then Arniqua, did you want to talk about the code next?
Yes. Let's see.
Or do you want me to go to the VS code? Is that?
Yeah, that would be easier for me to read.
Okay.
Okay, so to tackle this week's issue, we're doing most of our work in the add item JS file. So for this, we decided that within the handle submit is where we would add a conditional to check whether or not, number one, if the user was trying to submit a empty string, and then from there we would display the error message for them to enter the name of their item. And then from there we would check whether or not, or we would check for casing or normalize the casing to ensure, or to check whether or not the item that they were entering already existed within the database. For this, we were able to use a little bit of regular expression, which was new for both of us to be able to implement. But yeah, we first wanted to lowercase both the list items that were in the database, which you'll see on line 30, which is where we map through the item names that were in the database already, lowercase those, and then removed any spacing and things like that. And then from there on line 40, you'll see where we check to see whether or not the array of item names, whether or not the item name that the user entered was within the database. And if the item that they were listing, if it was new and it did not exist within the database already, or if it wasn't an empty string, then we would go with the initial code that was added so that the new item name could be added to the database.
Great. And then, so what we chose to do was previously we had an alert popping up for letting the user know that their item had been added to the database. And also we did have one in there previously that covered matches with spacing, I think, or no, if it was an empty item, that was the one that we had covered, but it was covered with an alert. So instead of having those alerts, and then to address the need for different messages in different situations, we decided to create a variable for message in state. So it's initially set to null. And then as Arniqua just discussed, we have those set to respond based on the user input accordingly. We had also talked about and attempted doing this a little bit differently using an object, and we found it easier to do it by using state. But I think that there could be advantages and disadvantages to one or the other. But in this case, we ended up going with using state and then just revealing this message. If a message exists, then it will display as we saw it. We have some temporary styling in there just to make it stand out. But then obviously we can style that differently later. And that was really the only other code that we changed was in the app.js. We had to pass the prop of data to this add item because it previously wasn't. So we have our, where is it, data here. So we had added that in and passed it from the app.js. So I think that pretty much covers everything, unless anyone has questions or comments.
Yeah, no, great job. I think we talked about your PR during office hours too. Really tackling regular expressions is awesome. Hopefully y'all were able to use some sort of regular expression calculator because I have to use those every time. My only question here, and there's no wrong or right answer here, and I was just curious to see why y'all decided to handle the checking in a handle submit as opposed to, let's say, checking the state on change, if that makes sense. What led you to kind of make the decision to do the checking on only submit?
I mean, I think speaking for myself, I didn't really think of it the way, like, what you were just describing, saying on change. So that would meaning on change of the
input. So like input. As the user is typing.
Right. I guess for me, it just didn't occur to me. Go ahead, Arniqua, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. That's actually a good idea now that you've mentioned it. But at the time when we were, tackling the issue, it honestly wasn't something that crossed our minds. But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said, there's actually no right or wrong answer. I would say most people probably would handle it in the handle submit. But I was just wondering if y'all had any like technical decisions that you made and if there is any why behind it, but cool.
Yeah, I think sometimes it just doesn't occur to me that like, oh, you could do this way. I'm going to go back to the example that we had from a previous week where it's like, oh, you can put that object like outside of the component itself, and it will still be accessible. Or be able to be accessed. So anyway, just yeah, it's one of those things where just lack of experience, I think, doesn't things don't occur to me. Like I think of one way instead of the 2 or 5 or 10 ways that a more experienced person might think of. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to +1 to Jen's suggestion about regular expression checkers. There's not a day that if I ever use regular expression, I always go to a checker and just like, is this matching or why isn't it matching? And if you haven't used them already, they're really, I get 2 or 3 out there that will pop up like as a top 3 on Google. And they all like I think they all have like a little sidebar where they'll show you like kind of shortcuts, right? For certain things, like if you only want digits or if you only want to match, digits or non-digits or alphanumeric characters, they're super good for that. But yeah, I thought I actually spent some time trying to break your your regular expression and couldn't. So like that was awesome. So good job on that.
I didn't know that the regular expression checker was a thing. Do you guys have one specifically that you recommend or that you use more often?
Go ahead.
You have a favorite one? Yeah, I usually do. I type in regex calculator on Google, and then let's see. I do have a favorite one. I just forget which one it is.
I think the one that I use a lot is regex 101.
Yeah, it's usually the top one. Yeah. There's like the top 3. These are the ones that I usually use. These are the 2. There's regex 101. Oh yeah, that one, and then the regexer. Exactly. I usually use. Oh, did I turn off the video for some reason? Yep. Those are usually the 2 I use the most. Whatever the Google search happens that day, and it comes up at the top is the one I use.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Generally, if like the link has been visited, I'll be like, oh, I think that's the one I use. So, and like, oh, it's not the one, but I've used this one before. So
yeah. Yeah. And I think this came up during office hours. I think Tina mentioned like, oh, we are very far from being a regex expert. And the secret is most people are not regex experts. Even the very, 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 very senior people, unless like that's their thing, that's their party trick. Then so never feel bad of having these tools. That's what they're.
Yeah, it's funny. Yesterday, I actually used this because something wasn't matching. I was like, I don't know what is going on here. And the regular expression was like probably 30 or 40 characters long. And I'm like, I don't know how to read this. So I put it into the checker. And then it's like breaking it down like, oh, there's this one part that is only matching at most 4 characters. And I had like 6 or 7 in there. So that's why it was not matching properly. I was like, okay, there it is. Yeah, so super useful.
If we had not done it that way, like using replace with the regular expression, what would be another way to, cover all of the cases of like spaces in the middle of the word, or like the 2 lowercase covers the casing for everything, but like when we use replace, it's not it's generally going to just replace like the first instance, right? So without like that global tag, is there another way to do that?
There is a string method, and I'll link it to you, called replace all. So although here, I did it again. I am on a Windows computer and I keep doing the Mac shortcut. All right. And I can link all these links. We can also link back in the Slack too, so we don't lose them after this meeting. But you could also use this method called replace all. So it's basically also a global replace, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Because that always gets me too. I type in .replace and then I'm like, what happened here? but I think using the regex is the right call in this case because of all the different non-alphanumeric characters that you want to get rid of. Spaces is one thing. It's pretty easy. Like you can just replace all a space with a string that's empty. But for all the other characters, you'd probably have to make an array of all the characters and check if it's in there and then replace it. So like, I think regex here would be the way to go. But the other way to go would probably be kind of what I mentioned.
Thanks. And then, sorry, can I just ask one more quick question? Hopefully quick.
Yeah.
What about the close matches that are just like slightly misspelled? Is there a good way to cover those?
A good term for that is called a fuzzy search. So it is a search where you're not looking for exact matches. One caveat I'd like to, well, fuzzy search is hard. And another thing is that want to mention that spell checking for your list is an excellent idea. Kind of like how if you Google something and you misspell it, it asks you, did you mean this? But the one thing that I do dislike about that is that when I am typing in another language, or I'm specifically typing something that's similar to a real word, that's like, I don't know, somebody's name or something, it always tries to autocorrect it. So that is something to think about if you want to build out that feature.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and who hasn't been annoyed by autocorrect when you're texting a friend, right? So yeah, it's something definitely look out for. But I think fuzzy searching is super useful. It's something that we at my company are running into with so we work with newspapers, and some people will sometimes not put in a hyphenated name in a newspaper, and it'll basically create a new record in our database. And we're like, that's actually not right. So yeah, there are definitely pros and cons to having being able to do exact matches versus a fuzzy search.
Yeah, on Wikipedia page, I linked it. Yeah, remind me to copy and paste all of these to the Slack before we get off this call. But yeah, okay. It's also called approximate string matching, the less happy name. All right. Any more questions with this PR/issue from this last week? Really excellent job getting all the acceptance criteria there. Team 2, are you ready to go?
Sure.
Sweet.
I'm going to share from my screen here. And we're going to learn from last week and just do from one screen this time. All right, can everyone see my screen? All right. So our issue number 10, big picture was to make sure that when a user purchases an item, that the next purchase date is calculated and stored with that item, so that eventually when our list is ordered by when the thing needs to be purchased, that it'll have that information for the sorting. And the big pieces of this were we're utilizing the calculate estimate function that was provided for us. And in order to do that, we had to calculate some additional values. And part of that was creating a new function called get days between dates that accepts 2 dates as arguments and returns the number of days between them. And then finally, giving calculate estimate what it needs, taking the number that it returns and adding it to the current date to get our date next purchased, and then store all that in the back end. So that's kind of the overview. And then we have our preview over here on the left, and I'm going to pull up Firebase, and let's pull up the record for eggs. Or not. Huh. Well, let's just clear that then. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, guys. Okay. Mariah, did you want to talk through the actual demo?
Yeah, so essentially all that we need to do is check one of the items on our list here, and you'll see over in Firebase that it is updated with the, it'll update the date next purchase once we do that, because it'll calculate. So if you want to go ahead and click on eggs. You saw it flash there, it updated with when it was last purchased, and also updated our date next purchase, and it is guessing 4 days. So I'm guessing we've used that a couple times. We get eggs a lot.
Awesome, thanks. So now that we've seen that, let's switch over to the code and see how all of this is working. So the new function that we made was the get days between dates function, and we decided to name these older date and newer date just so the user has some direction, or the programmer on that's using this has some direction, but we use absolute value down here, so I don't think that the order particularly matters. But the way this is working is the format of the date that we're getting, the timestamp that we're getting from Firebase. So that's the date created, the date last purchased, the date next purchased, always comes in the format of a timestamp, which is different than when you just create a new datetime object. So there are a couple of instances where one bug that we ran into was when we were passing, we tried creating the new datetime object outside in the function, in the component that's referencing this, and passing that in as one of these dates, and that was not working, because then when you say to date, it gets grumpy. So what we decided to do instead was, if you need the current date, you just leave off the newer date. And so if there is not a newer date, then we're creating a current date and saying current date minus older date, where we're returning the absolute value of that divided by milliseconds, if that makes sense. So the number of days between is returned, and then sorry, that was a total complete word salad. If the user provides both the older date and the newer date, then this is evaluated as true, and we simply return the number of days between those two dates.
Cool. And then we're also going to talk a little bit through this logic down here. Perfect. For when the item is checked versus unchecked. So essentially, if it isn't checked, we are gathering the information that we want from our calculate estimate function, which we can talk about in a minute, but it comes from index.js. And that takes in the previous estimate, the days since last transaction on line 141, and as well as our updated purchase count. And all of those come together and give us the updated estimate, which calculates our future date. So if we want to go ahead and just take a quick look at calculates estimate, actually, so you can see exactly what that's doing. This was fortunately already written for us, but you can see that it automatically sets our previous estimate to 14. So if it's a brand new item and the user has never bought it before, it's just gonna auto set it to 14. And then as the user more frequently buys that item, it'll change using the logic that you see. So we originally thought we had to write all of this, and we kept when we alt clicked on calculate estimate, it would take us to a TypeScript file. So we were really, really thankful that we found this. But I'll go ahead and pass it back to Weston.
Let's see here. So a couple of decisions that we made along the way were that you might remember that some of this logic used to live in the list item component, and we opted to move it here. So if we go back to our list item, so handle purchase, a lot of that logic used to live here, and the way we were handling updating the backend was we were calling the function update item, and we were actually passing an object that was already prepared into it. And the issue with that was that we're going to have instances, eventually we'd like the functionality where you can uncheck an item, but we additionally have this always running up here every time that the component is called, that's checking to see if the item is over 24 hours, if it's been checked over 24 hours ago, and if so, it's unchecking it. So we decided to pull that out and create just a simpler function on the back end, or in the Firebase that simply unchecks it if that condition has been met. Here we're actually now passing the whole item into that update item function, so that we have access, we can destructure it up here, and we have access to all of these various properties. So that was one decision that we made, and then up here you can see the unchecked function is pretty simple. We're just getting the item ID and setting it to false, and then updating it. I don't think we have any other things, although I am seeing now, not to bring this up, a potential bug up in the code review, but we actually aren't utilizing that default value of 14 because we're always providing a previous estimate. So I'm wondering if it actually makes sense, if it's never been purchased before, if we have a conditional here that only grabs the previous estimate if it's been purchased before, and otherwise we don't pass this. Anyway. All right. Sorry for the confusing you were there.
No, I think this issue this week is probably one of the most challenging to read through. I think did you say word salad earlier? I think the issue itself is a word salad sometimes, and you're just like, what are you even asking for? And I think you all did a good job kind of navigating that this week. I think my favorite part of this code is the decision to move the business logic outside of the component. I think early on when you're using React, it's really easy to start blowing up use effect or like other hooks in the component or handlers, and all of a sudden your component doesn't fit on the page anymore, and you're like, what happened? So I think just encapsulating the business logic and giving it a name that makes sense makes it easier for any group to go into your code and say, oh, I think I understand what this is doing. And being able, all the great naming, you all are good at naming. I'm really bad at naming, but all the good naming and all this code is really excellent. So I can, even when I'm not reviewing code, I like to peruse the PRs just to see what's going on. And it makes it really easy to understand what you all are working with. So props to you all there. My only question for this code review is that kind of you did a really good job moving over the business logic to kind of the different places outside of the component. My question is that for the, I think it was the uncheck item or something like that, there was still some logic to see if you needed to uncheck the item living in the component. And so my only question there is that why did you decide to leave that in the component and not move that out as well? Was there any special considerations there?
No, and I think that's a great point and something that could use some refactoring eventually. I really liked how clean in the dates utility at the very top, there's a const that's just called 1 day in milliseconds, and it's just a clean value that's then used down below. I would, it'd be great to implement a similar variable to clean up that logic a little bit, and that could even become a helper function that gets added to the dates utility or the utilities dates JS file. So it's just called instead of having to all be living there.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan, actually.
And one other benefit of like moving your function out, like, breaking things down in smaller functions, eventually when you are required to write tests, it makes it much easier to write those tests for smaller bits of code than if you're trying to test like an entire component or, just like, one of the things that you'll most likely run into when you do start extensively testing is that as you have like a function calling other functions, you may run into like issues where essentially like circular imports sort of, where this is importing this, but this has not been mocked yet. I won't go into that too far, but this happens on a regular basis, and to have things split up like into smaller chunks makes it much easier to kind of debug like why the test isn't working. But yeah, I just really enjoyed seeing you break those chunks off into separate files, or just outside of the component and into smaller digestible chunks. Makes it much easier to just read the code and kind of follow along with what's happening.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go first.
One thing I wanted to ask, in your function, the get days between dates function, I think maybe you had misspoke, but the ordering of the arguments does matter there, because if you were to leave off an argument, it would have to be not the first argument. Does that make sense? So you have like older date and newer date. And if one were undefined, it doesn't mean the other one the function knows which one you're leaving off.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Unless you explicitly pass in an undefined, but probably wouldn't do that. What was I gonna ask actually? Oh, yes. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but I know there was a lot of questions this week about what the issue was even asking for. I think it was a really good learning experience. So maybe could you guys talk a little bit more to that about how you were trying to understand the issue and maybe like what the difficulties were there?
Mariah, do you have any thoughts?
I think I kind of touched briefly on it. There was a lot of confusion around the calculated estimate initially, just because we would all click on it and it would take us to that TypeScript file. And we're like, oh my gosh, we have to write this logic as well. And so we were talking through how to do that. And then we were shown that it's actually in the index.js already written for us. But what was kind of cool about that is what we had talked through, how we thought we needed to approach it was kind of how it was already written out. So that was kind of cool. But I felt a little hung up on that initially. And I was just like, what do they want from us? Like, what do we need to do here? But I don't know if you have something to add to that, Weston.
Yeah, I think you just about covered it. I think when we talked through the calculate the or get days between dates, that was feeling fairly clear to us. And then, yeah, thank you so much, Jen, for pointing us to the fact that that was completed, because we were about to like dive in and try to like do the weighted average, and that would not have gone well. So thanks.
Yeah, no problem. But that kind of feedback is really great for us to kind of like improve the issues in the future. I think maybe you all, do you think that if we kind of linked to that, like that repo link to the code snippet in the issue, probably would have solved a lot of headache for you guys?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think just like saying calculated estimate in index.js.
All right.
I think the other thing that was confusing is if you do the alt click to, and it takes you to that TypeScript file, there's maybe just adding one line of comment there that like, I don't know, because there's a lot of language in there that sounds like instructions. So we were reading through it and we're like, okay, like we get it, like this is what it wants us to do. And, that was totally on us for navigating to it that way and not looking around, but that might be a good place to leave a breadcrumb.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks for the feedback.
I have quick feedback just for future tickets. So for the past 2 weeks, I've noticed that it's kind of like unbalanced as far as like how much work is required on one ticket and, you know, versus the other one. So I don't know if that could be something that's reevaluated going forward as well, just because, you know, it would be cool if we could, you know, share the load, you know, more, I guess, really going forward.
That makes sense. That's really great feedback. Thank you, Anika. I'll write this down. Any other, this turned into a feedback session. So any other feedback?
Not feedback, but I did want to point out that generally when I work with JavaScript dates, I don't. I try to work with JavaScript dates as little as possible and actually use a outside library. But I was actually really, I was really impressed by like that get days between dates function and how simple it was, and what you were just like wrapping your head around the difficulty of like working with date time objects and making it, you know, very simple in the code there. So like really good job there.
It's helpful that JS date doesn't take time zones into account.
I would just, piggybacking on what was already said. I think that you took like a really, really complex issue and made it very readable for me. Like when I went in and read through, it was really readable, which was very nice. And as it was already mentioned, like the naming of variables being super clear was great. The only question remains, I think, is just like, I still don't totally follow, because I saw Weston, I think you commented on something about when, so like when if you add an item and then you purchase it on the same day, then the future purchase date becomes the same as the current date. And then I know Weston, like I said, you wrote some comments, but I don't think I totally followed. So I'm still, if you can explain a little bit, like, I don't know how that future purchase or date next purchase date being today, like why or how that makes sense, and how it's not going to become an issue when we get to the sorting by those dates, because it'll already be like, if that date is already in the past as of tomorrow. I don't know. Am I making any sense? I feel like I'm not.
Yeah, so I think Weston, is this what you had asked in the thread yesterday about, but I can't remember what the argument name was, but essentially if you've purchased the item less than 2 times, it's going to automatically use this, sorry, I can't remember the names of the properties right now, or arguments on the function, but it's essentially going to use that last purchase date or whatever it's called as the date, you know, so that's what you're pointing out. where it's like it's the same date. I don't know. I think it's more, it does seem really weird, but it works out after you've, bought it the second time. So when it is like, there's like the second purchase, that date will be more accurate. But up until that point, it's kind of like, we don't have enough, we can't really calculate this because we don't have any data to calculate with.
Yeah. So some color on this. So back all the way back when TCL5, when I was doing this, the calculate estimate function did not have that first conditional of the greater than 2. Our group actually added that in because we noticed that if you checked an item, like obviously kind of what you were alluding to, Tina, like it didn't make sense. Like everything was going all wonky, like the estimates were getting all weird. And so if you really wanted to have a weighted estimate, like it makes more sense if you have at least 3 items or greater than 2 in your list, right? So that's kind of why that conditional is there. The other thing I think they added afterwards sometime between when I was in TCL and now is the kind of previous estimates default is 14. And so I think that is the bug that Weston was alluding to when he was presenting just now. So if you leave the previous estimate empty as undefined, the default value is 14, so that it automatically adds 14 days to the next purchase. So it doesn't matter that the difference was X or something like that. If there was no previous purchase date, then it will kind of give you a buffer so that it'll be a date in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, was that there should be some kind of default. And that's when Weston, you were talking about that, that's what I thought I was understanding, but then it just wasn't like syncing up with what I was experiencing. So yeah, I think I'm following now.
Yeah. And if you have any more questions, just throw them in the Slack channel too. If you're reading the code and you're like,
I guess I was wondering if like, if it's less than 2, instead of returning the days since last transaction, which will be like less than 1 in this edge case, returning the days between the date created and the date next like the original date next purchased, which is, so it maintains that first soon, not soon, whatever number, but
I'll have to look at it again because that
confusing.
kind of like went through my ears, and I was trying to imagine it, but I couldn't imagine it. So we can take a look at that PR again, and definitely, like, I think for the most part, was the PR already like accepted and it's merged in and everything good like that?
Yeah.
I approved it yesterday.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah. So all of this can just be like another branch on top of that if we want to kind of like, since we're kind of going into the second half of Collab Lab, this is you can see actually the issues that we have left. There's not a lot of like, or at least for the next week there are, but I think going into the last 2 weeks, there's mostly just a lot of like front-end refactors or styling or whatever nice things you want to add to your app. And so I think like if you want to take it on or shelve it or add a new issue to try and like resolve these kinds of things, I think would be a good idea on how to handle that. Cool. Are there any, we went a little bit over time with the demos this week, but love it. There was a lot of discussion. Are there any other questions before we move on to the accessibility learning module? No? All right, yeah, take it away.
Okay, 1 second. I have to shift screens around, or windows. Oh, no. Okay. All right, are you all, let me know if you can't see my screen, otherwise I'm just gonna start. Hold on. don't have my notes up. There we go. Okay, so accessibility. I don't deal with this that much in my current role. I did when I was working at a digital agency. Sorry. Okay, but yeah, let's just dive in. So what is accessibility? What, why, and how of accessibility? All right. So you may have seen this acronym before, or this hashtag A11Y. It's actually 2 1s, not 2 L's. And the reason being that there are 11 letters between the A and Y here. So A11Y. All right. And from Wikipedia, what is web accessibility? It's the inclusive practice of ensuring there are no barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites. Yeah, I won't read the rest of this, but basically we want to create websites that are that anybody can use, right? So you kind of think of, and we'll go into this more later, but you know, there are circumstances where people will have difficulty navigating, no matter if you are able-bodied or not. And I guess like when sites are designed with accessibility in mind, it increases the likelihood that anybody can use it independent of the situation or restrictions they have, right? And the W3C, which is the Worldwide Web Consortium, that's a standards body for the web. They have a working group dedicated to accessibility. And in the US section 508, this states that all government websites have to be accessible to everybody. And this is, you know, a lot of businesses have also taken this to heart, and they consider this to be like one of the things that's very important to you know, any web application is to have anybody be able to use it. All right. There are people who access websites with assistive technologies. They could be screen readers or screen magnifiers. Who doesn't have parents who have like large text on their phone? If you look at my screen when I'm coding, the text is huge. And when I'm just working on my laptop, I'm like, I can't see anything. So little thing, you know, I mean, we all have some restrictions that say that we need a little bit of help, right? Yeah, and on top of this, there are, this is something I didn't know, Braille displays that just have, you know, it's like the Braille will pop up so that people can follow along on a website. Some popular readers, so these first two I'm not familiar with because they're on Windows systems, but VoiceOver I've used very sparingly, and it is really interesting to try to figure out how a person who uses this on a daily basis, how they navigate the web. It's really interesting to see. It's something that if you have a Mac, you can check out, or if you have a Windows system, I know that NVDA is free to use. I'm not sure about JAWS. Like I said, I'm not too familiar with these two. Here. Okay, so why do we do it? It's the right thing to do. You know, we're providing equitable access to information. Depending on your company or who you work for, you may be legally obligated to make your website accessible. So that's what I'm saying. If you work for a government agency and you're building a website for some kind of municipal government, they will have to be accessible. What's really interesting is that there are more people who use assistive technology than live in Canada. So just kind of think about that, right? I can't remember what the population in Canada is, like 20 million or something like that, maybe more. But yeah, so 20% of people who visit websites have some sort of disability. And making your pages accessible for everybody, it's just like, I mean, just in order to open up that access, we want to make your pages more accessible to people with disabilities. This next slide is pretty cool. So this is what so I'd mentioned that we all may or may not go through some sort of situation of disability. So if we look at touch, somebody who was born with an arm, this is like an example of a permanent disability. Temporary, let's say you've broken something, your wrist or your hand or your arm, you may only have one, can only navigate with one arm. Hopefully it's your dominant hand. If it's not, then you'll have more problems. If you ever had a baby, or if you're holding a baby or a dog or whatever, your pet, that can restrict you, right? So it's really nice if you were, let's say, a new parent, you're navigating the web, how much easier that would be if you didn't necessarily have to rely on your mouse. I have a mouse that is very specifically right-handed. So let's say I was holding something in my right hand and I can't mouse around. It'd be really nice if I could just tap around. Yeah, sight, I already talked about this. So there are people who access the web who are legally blind, or maybe their eyesight's failing them slowly, or they're driving or distracted. So these are different, I guess, examples of situational and permanent disabilities. And I guess the idea here is, hey, if we think about building our applications and websites with accessibility in mind, it not only helps people with permanent disabilities, but people who have temporary and situational disabilities. All right, so how do we do this? Now, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but some of the things we actually already talked about. If we use valid and semantic HTML, this is going to, so basically doing any or all of these things are only going to help, right? And I guess what do we mean by semantic HTML? It's the correct tag for what we're talking about, the content that we have. And we had touched on this with the H2 tag last week, which was not wrong by any means, right? But was there a better tag that we could have used? Just kind of move on because we are short on time here. You should have an alt tag for every image tag. And this doesn't mean that you need text in the alt tag, but it should exist. And this is something that I didn't realize, that even when your alt tag contains an empty string, a screen reader will look at that and skip over it because, let's say, the image didn't do anything or wasn't very important to the content of your page. It was just kind of like decorative or there, right? Otherwise, screen reader will see an empty image tag and kind of like read through that tag, trying to decipher what is going on there. If you've used ARIA labels, ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. This is kind of like a cheat to get around semantic HTML tags. You could have a div, like the generic div tag, and do all kinds of stuff with it, and put in ARIA roles to kind of get around the semantic tags. But it really, ARIA should be like the last resort. One of the things that you want to do is when you're creating your application sites, like play around with the keyboard, see if you can navigate with keyboard. It's actually kind of fun. Sometimes I enjoy just tabbing around, or who doesn't enjoy up arrowing on the console just to get to that last command, So these are like kind of things that you want to think about. And the tab ordering is something that's really important, and we'll cover that in the demo in a second here. Color contrast. I've definitely created text that overlays on other text, and the contrast just isn't there, and it's really hard if it's hard for you to see, or if it's like you're questioning it, it's going to be very difficult for somebody who has issues with just kind of deciphering colors. One thing, and you already did this with your, I guess, like the warning message. So like, kind of had a quick discussion about when you have an item in your list that's already there, you have like that red warning tag or that red warning message. It's also a good idea to have like an icon or something like that that's indicating that there's some kind of error, right? So what if somebody can't see red? That's something to consider. Sorry, I'm kind of flying through this right now. All right. So some tools, and I actually do have some of these tools on my browser. Axe is great, but it only finds 30% of the issues. So it's not a catch-all, right? There are companies like Fabletech Labs that have people who regularly use assistive technologies to go through sites. And so one way they can audit. I do kind of want to get through this to show you the demo. Okay, so it's demo time. And anyway, I have this pulled up on a different page. Well, we can do it here. All right, so this is an example of a very accessible site. I think if I just tab through, right? So I can get to here, open up. Okay, cool. I can open up this modal and easily like just tab across. And I'm sure you all know that you can like shift tab, right, to go backwards through things. So this is like a way that somebody, let's say I have holding a dog, so I don't have children. I can go through and just kind of click through this modal. Yeah, it's like a really easy site to click through. It makes sense to me that, you know, this the navigation is super easy. Just up arrowing to go up the page and down arrow through to scroll down. And this, I believe, is a site that is not great for accessibility. Is it? Sorry. I think it's this one. Okay, so this is a demo site. You can kind of see that I'm pretty sure I've done this color combination, the red on blue here, thinking that it was okay, and it's kind of not. Or just like the red on blue or the yellow on blue. All right, so this, I do want to show you that I am tabbing through here and I really don't know where I am right now. I believe it's somewhere in the middle of the page where the tab, okay, now we can find it. I think it starts in the middle and then it goes up to the, yeah, up into the menu. And so I have no idea, like I said, I was tabbing at least 10 times before I got to where I can see this, this menu now. Yeah, so these are things, I mean, I think it's being aware of people who are using your application or your site who are not able-bodied is something that A, it's like first, just be aware. B, it's kind of, it is actually kind of fun to try to navigate through your site or application without a mouse. And in general, I think as you work, it's like it's you know, think about the keyboard shortcuts you use and how much faster that is for you to get through, to fly through to your VS Code or whatever application. Yeah, and I guess just to wrap it up real quick, very quickly is, you know, helping, just like I said, making the site accessible for, you know, permanently people who with permanent disabilities will only help like everybody else, right? So, sorry, I think I covered everything that I wanted to, and I will definitely link all these pages and share the slides in Slack for you. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, I didn't leave much time for questions, but if you have questions, let's talk about it. No questions are okay too.
I have a question about like when you're using Bootstrap and those types of, you know, CSS, they seem to rely heavily on like divs, like div this, div that. Mm-hmm. And like divs generally are not great semantically, right? So I'm just kind of curious, like what, and I mean, I can look it up too, but if you have just divs all over the place because you're using a Bootstrap or a library like that, is that where the ARIA is that like the appropriate use for ARIA, or?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've played around with Bootstrap, to be honest. But I feel like ARIA labels are kind of like that catch-all for for when you do have like those generic non-semantic tags, you know, like you could definitely make anything into a button, for instance, right? A clickable button, but it's like the button tag exists for a reason, right? Or what else is there? Yeah, I mean, that's like, I'm sorry, that's like the only example I can think of off the top of my head, but you can kind of like turn HTML and tweak it into like different things that may not be like the appropriate, I guess like there are certain tags that exist for a reason. And if you can find a way to use those instead of like using a generic div to kind of like to repurpose a div for something else, like you should, have best practices to do that, I would say.
Yeah, I think like with divs, they are not like let's say like a cardinal sin for accessibility, because sometimes divs are quite necessary for sites. But I think what you can do is kind of look up specifically how screen readers or stuff work. And you can see that there's some attributes and stuff you can add to the divs. Like, for example, if a div is a tab, you can put a tab index or something like that, so that it is more understandable accessibility wise. And so I think I also am not an expert in accessibility, but you can see how a lot of the issues that are written for CollabLab, we have a few senior engineers at CollabLab who are mentors, who are like very big on accessibility. And our founder is also, I believe they founded a company recently that is basically about accessibility consulting and things like that. So basically, if you are interested in this topic, we could definitely find more mentors and more resources. But the bottom line here is that often accessibility is an afterthought in development, especially when you're attracted to this industry. It's all the shiny designer designs and like cool animations and stuff, when actually a lot of the time the fancy newness stuff can be difficult to use accessibility with. So this is a learning module to kind of, CollabLab was actually the first place that I was introduced really to accessibility. And so, which is sad because I had been going through a boot camp and they maybe touched on accessibility through ARIA labels, and then I found out those were kind of in a no. So, but basically, long story short, accessibility is very important, but we are not experts. And so if you all want more resources, we can definitely find those for you.
Yeah, and there, I know that there are kind of free services that can audit your app or site. I think Lighthouse is one that I've used before, but there are a bunch out there, but none of them are, I think, something that you can count on 100, like as far as like 100%, this will give you like, this is accessible at all. But yeah, as Jen was saying, I think it's, I'm definitely not an expert at accessibility, but it is, it's something that we consider at my company. We have people working on it, but Andrew is definitely very passionate about this topic. So yeah, if you all want some more information, we definitely reach out to him or some of the other mentors to find out more.
All right. Any other follow-up questions? All right, so we're a little bit over time, so I'm gonna speed through these issues. Let me share my screen really quick. And does that look good for everyone? Looks good? All right, sweet. Let's see, we are week 6. Wow, we're week 6. Woo! All right, our first group is Weston and Tina, and the second group is Arniqua and Mariah. All right, so let me just move my Zoom thing. Okay, cool. So let's go look at the first issue. As a user, I want to be able to delete items from my shopping list so that my list isn't cluttered with items I don't want to buy in the future. Yeah, so, like let's say you wanted to buy, I don't know, a mug. You don't need to continually buy mugs in the future if you already have one. So you want to delete it. So users might make a mistake when entering an item or may decide they don't want to buy a certain item again. You don't want 100 mugs. So allowing them to delete the list items will help them keep their list tidy. So the acceptance criteria for this is the list item component renders a button that allows the user to delete an item from their list when clicked. Clicking the delete button prompts the user to confirm that they really want to delete the item because you want to avoid fat fingering and then your whole list like disappears. And then the delete item function in API/Firebase has been filled out and deletes the items from the Firestore database. So we can take a look at this wireframe. So as noted in the wireframe, activating the delete button should show a confirmation dialog. We want to give users a chance to confirm destructive actions. This is generally a good practice and a typical workflow that people are used to when implementing these types of features. It might be tempting to create your own modal dialog component to handle confirmation, but modals are fraught with accessibility concerns. So consider using a simple JavaScript confirm dialog. All right, so we can take a look at this wireframe. We can see that kind of there's the details and delete page. And then it also kind of talks about like using an ARIA label to denote how soon, in addition to a visual representation for the checkbox or whatever that you decide for that. And then, so activating the delete should activate a pop-up confirmation. Hopefully that makes sense. And then let's go into the other issue here. So, kind of exactly what you were talking about earlier, Aniqua. This issue, it looks pretty beefy. All right, let's see. As a user, I want to view a list of my shopping list items in order of how soon I am likely to buy each of them again so that it's clear what I need to buy soon. So sorting items by how soon the user might need to buy them will make it easier for the user to identify what they need to buy, which will in turn help them plan better for their shopping trips. To that end, we will be sorting items into 4 possible groups according to how urgently the user should buy them. So it's basically all of the categories that we have determined in that object that you all have. And then the other group though is inactive. So it's been 60 days since they purchased it. They clearly maybe they leave it on the list because it's like a wish list kind of thing, but it's not something that they constantly need to be reminded of. And then to implement this feature, your team will need to create some new UI elements so the user knows how their items are sorted and write some logic behind the scenes to perform the sorting itself. You can read the acceptance criteria and our notes carefully to be sure you understand the tasks at hand. So acceptance criteria, Acceptance criteria, items in the list are shown with an indicator that tells the user they should buy the item soon, kind of soon, or not soon, or the item is inactive. This urgency indicator does not rely on color, exactly what we talked about in our accessibility demo today. So API/Firestore.js exports a new compare purchase urgency function with the following behaviors. Sorts inactive items last, then it sorts items in ascending order of days until purchase, and sorts items with the same days until purchase alphabetically. So they specifically list these in this order so that you is trying to lay out the logic and what order to sort things, because you can get different sorting behavior based on which one first. So a stretch goal. Ooh, wow, stretch goal. If you complete all the previous acceptance criteria, consider what happens when an item's date next purchased has passed, but isn't yet inactive. Let's call that item overdue. So extend the functionality of compare purchase urgency to sort overdue items to the top of the list. Indicate in your UI when an item is overdue. So this is optional. So probably just make sure you have all of this acceptance criteria done up here. And then if you really want to badger your users about overdue items, that would be after all of that is done. So we can take a look at the notes here. There's a lot to do for this issue. You can read this section for some ideas about how to approach the tasks ahead. There's more util functions here. So remember that Firestore database, their dates are in timestamp objects. So I think Weston and Mariah, you experienced that this week for like changing things to date. Indicating purchase urgency in the UI. It's tempting to use colors or icons to indicate how soon the user should buy an item. Keep in mind, if you only use color, a colorblind user won't be able to tell the difference between urgency indicators. And if you use icons, you have to teach users what those icons mean. With these constraints, it's probably best to render plain text like soon, kind of soon, etc. in order to show urgency. You can still use color alongside that text, and design of where that text goes is up to you. So the bottom line is, don't just use color, and you need to educate your user on how to use the app. Sorting the list. So we're sorting by multiple criteria, the criteria that we listed above. So you can go ahead, it links the MDN docs to the sort if you've never used it before. And then it'll also give you examples on how to write comparison functions. So as always, if you need help with from the mentors or the other team, let everyone know. And it seems like there's a lot going on in this issue. And so what I might suggest is that the stretch goal maybe could be something that both teams work on together to kind of make the workload a little bit more even. So kind of get through the acceptance criteria for each of your issues. And then since this issue seems like it's a lot, can do the stretch goal altogether. That's just a suggestion, but you don't have to listen to me. So let's see, let's look at our groups again. Yep, there's our groups right here. So does anyone want issue 11, which is the delete items, or the sorting? So it's delete or sorting.
Right now we'll take the delete ticket.
Okay, sounds good. Sweet. All right. All right. So we have the tickets and issues assigned. Thank you so much, everyone, for being patient with us as we go over time, but I really enjoyed all the excellent like conversation that we've had today. If you all have any questions or anything, follow-up questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And like, I have 5 minutes, so if anyone has any questions that are very urgent right now, they can ask, but everyone else feel free to hop off, and I will see you all next week.
Thanks so much. Great to see you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye.